But Mr. Sanders is also taking steps that signal he is committed to the duration of the race and will strike back aggressively when he's attacked. On Saturday, his campaign sent a blistering letter to the Center for American Plutocrats. I put in Plutocrats for Progress, a Clinton-aligned liberal think tank accusing them of abetting Mr. Trump's attacks or playing a, quote, destructive role in Democratic politics, and of being beholden to the corporate money they receive. The letter came days after a website aligned with the center aired a video highlighting Mr. Sanders' status as a millionaire. With other mainline party leaders, he is offering more honey than vinegar. Last month, for example, he used his first trip to Iowa as a 2020 candidate to quietly meet with Jeff Link, a veteran party strategist, and Patty Judge, the former state agricultural secretary, to discuss rural policies and politics, according to a Democrat familiar with the meeting. Mr. Sanders' campaign also reached out to Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, and a top Clinton ally in 2016, who, by the way, is corrupt, to have her join them at what they dubbed an, quote, Ohio Workers' Town Hall on Sunday. Quote, if anybody thinks Bernie Sanders is incapable of doing politics, they haven't seen him in Congress in 30 years, said Tad Devine, Mr. Sanders' longtime strategist who is not working for his campaign this year. This guy is trying to win this time. But such outreach matters little to many Democrats, especially donors and party officials, who are growing more alarmed, they're alarmed, I tell you, about Mr. Sanders' candidacy. Mr. Brock, who supports Mrs. Clinton's past presidential bids, said, quote, the Bernie question comes up at every fundraising meeting I do. Steve Ratner, a major Democratic Party donor, said the topic is discussed endlessly in his orbit, his cocktail crowd, handkerchief orbit, and among Democratic leaders, it is becoming hard to block out. Quote, it has gone from being a low hum to a rumble, said Susan Swecker, the chairwoman of Virginia's Democratic Party. Howard Wolfson, who spent months immersed in Democratic polling and focus groups on behalf of the former New York Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg, had a blunt message for Sanders skeptics. Quote, people underestimate the possibility of him becoming the nominee at their own peril. The discussion about Mr. Sanders has to date been largely confined to private settings because, like establishment Republicans in 2016, Democrats are uneasy about elevating him or alienating his supporters. This is the most important paragraph of this story. The matter of what to do about Bernie and the larger imperative of party unity has, for example, hovered over a series of previously undisclosed, which is also called secret, Democratic dinners in New York and Washington, organized by the longtime party financier Bernard Schwartz. The gatherings have included scores from the moderate or center-left wing of the party, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, former Governor Terry McAuliffe of Virginia, who's BFFs with Bill and Hillary, and Mayor, small town, America's mayor, who the corporate media is prostituting themselves for, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, who I guess they're souring on good old Beto, himself a presidential candidate, and the president of the Center for American Plutocrats, Neera Tanden. Quote, he did us a disservice in the last election, that Bernie Sanders, the financier Mr. Schwartz said, and who said he will support Vice President Joe Biden in the primary. What's so amazing about this, and I'm going to say it right here, you can call me an alarmist if you want, but I think it's pretty obvious. Do people think that Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, a big dollar financier, Pete Buttigieg, Neera Tanden, and Terry McAuliffe are meeting in secret dinners to discuss Real Housewives of New York? You think they're there to talk about, subsidies for agriculture? You think they're there, to discuss the ending of Game of Thrones? I've always said it. I think Ned Stark is the leader of the White Walkers. So if that happens, remember I said it. Jen thinks I'm crazy, but that's true. Ned Walker is the Night King. It will come out. They are having secretive dinners in New York, D.C. Pete Buttigieg among them. Mayor Pete, who's not progressive. I did a video. I interviewed a candidate for South Bend mayor because Pete's not running again. Watch it if you want to know what he's done or not done for South Bend. I mean, I think objectively one could say they are actively talking about how they could rig the primary against Bernie Sanders. They're getting wiser this time. They're not putting it in writing. They're not putting it in email this time. Neera Tanden, she's wised up. They are having meetings because they see the writing on the wall and they see it's not only possible, it's likely. Bernie Sanders might be the Democratic nominee against Donald Trump. And as I've always said, I said it at the Young Turks, and I'll say it again, they would rather 4 more years of Donald Trump if it means they stay in power and the money keeps rolling in. Bernie Sanders said they'd rather go down on the Titanic if they have first class. I want you to save this video. If you know how to save a video, save it. Because later, when we find out how they're rigging the primary, remember this story. Remember these meetings. There's no way they're meeting to talk about the price of tea in China. But it's hardly only Mr. Sanders' critics who believe the structure of this race could lead to a 50-state contest like the previous 2 Democratic primaries and require deal cutting to determine a nominee before or at the convention, unlike previous 2 Democratic primaries. Quote, "If I had to bet today, we'll get to Milwaukee and not have a nominee," said Mrs. Daughtry, who was neutral in the 2016 primary. The reason she theorized is simple. Super Tuesday, when at least 10 states vote, comes just 3 days after the last of 4 of early states. After that, nearly 40% of the delegates will have been distributed, and she suspects carved up among Democratic candidates so that nobody can emerge with a majority. Unlike Republicans who use a winner-take-all primary format, Democrats use a proportional system, so candidates only need to garner 15% of the vote in a primary or caucus to pick up delegates. And even if a candidate fails to capture 15% statewide, he or she could still win delegates by meeting that vote threshold in individual congressional districts. Should no bargain be struck by the time of the first roll call vote at the 2020 convention in Milwaukee, such as a unity ticket between a pair of leading delegate winners, the nomination battle would move to a second ballot. Oh boy. And under the new rules crafted by the DNC after the 2016 race, that is when party insiders and elected officials known as superdelegates would be able to cast a binding vote. The specter of superdelegates deciding the nomination, particularly if Mr. Sanders is a finalist, is highly unappetizing to party officials. If we have a role, so be it. But I'd much prefer that it be decided in the first round just from a unity standpoint, said Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan. That may not happen should Mr. Sanders, sustained by his online fundraising network, remain in the primary but fail to win a majority of delegates after the last state's vote in June. If he is unable, for example, to broaden his appeal with non-white voters, he would accumulate hundreds of delegates but still fall short of the nomination, again with the false narratives. His appeal, he's doing very well polling-wise among minority voters right now. Yet that result might not be fully realized until later in the primary calendar, well after Mr. Sanders has put his money to work. Quote, "If he is consistently raising $6 million more than his next closest opponent, he's going to have a massive fundraising advantage," said Rufus Gifford, former President Obama's 2012 finance director, noting that Mr. Sanders will be able to blanket expensive and delegate-rich Super Tuesday states like California and Texas with ads during early voting there. Mr. Gifford, who has gone public in recent days with his dismay over major Democratic fundraisers remaining on the sidelines, said of Mr. Sanders, quote, "I feel like everything we are doing is playing into his hands." But the peril of rallying the party's elite donor class against a candidate whose entire public life has been organized around confronting concentrated wealth is self-evident. Mr. Sanders would gleefully seize on any Stop Bernie support. You could see him reading the headlines now, Mr. Brock mused. "Rich people don't like me." Well, they were right, because Bernie Sanders' campaign sent out an email this afternoon. Let me get it. they are rolling right off of this New York Times. By the way, the New York Times should just re-headline this: the United Corporation strikes back. The United Corporations of America strikes back. Because this is a concentrated cabal trying to rig the primary against the frontrunner, Bernard Sanders. Here's Bernie's campaign. The New York Times has an article today with the headline, "Stop Sanders. Democrats are agonizing over his momentum." And they put a bunch of quotes in there that I just read you. From canopy-filled fundraisers on the coast to the cloakrooms of Washington, mainstream Democrats are increasingly worried, the article begins. And then they say, Mr. Brock, who smeared Anita Hill and who led an effort to stop our political revolution 4 years ago, is almost correct. They don't just hate Bernie Sanders. They hate everything our political revolution embodies. They hate Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, breaking up the big banks, free public college for all. That is why, in the next 48 hours, we are launching a fundraising drive that I hope will send an unmistakable message to the political establishment about the strength of our political revolution. That's why I'm asking you today, make a $3 contribution to our campaign as part of an emergency 48-hour fundraising drive to fight back against the anti-Sanders campaign being hatched by the financial elite of this country. They may have canopy-filled fundraisers. We have each other. In solidarity, Faiz Shakur, campaign manager. Well, by the way, Faiz, if you're watching, get back to me. I don't appreciate it. I've reached out to his campaign at least 6 or 7 times to get some questions answered, including why are you silent on Julian Assange's arrest and likely extradition, Senator Sanders? I like Bernie, but if he's wrong, he's wrong, and he's wrong. I don't know. I'm sure he's being told, stay out of it. But there's right or wrong, Bernie. And this is not only an issue of press freedom. This is not only an issue of the First Amendment. This is an issue of crimes against humanity. He might not get the death penalty if he's extradited, but he will have a living death. He will be in prison for the rest of his life. They will drum up extra charges on him too. So Bernie Sanders should be leading the charge against this. And if he doesn't, if he thinks he should be extradited, then he should say so and explain why. So I don't know what to tell you. And I forgot to mention this during the donors part, but Beto O'Rourke, good old Beto, stand on a bar, Beto O'Rourke. Remember when I told you, I don't buy that, $6.1 million in one day? Remember those headlines about Beto O'Rourke's $6.1 million first 24 hours? Well, he inflated that figure a bit with $300,000 in general election funds he can't spend in the primary, meaning Bernie Sanders raised most for primary on day one. I'm sure CNN will, be leading tonight with this, as well as MSNBC. So yeah, 300,000 of that figure was from his general election funds. So Beto raised less than 6.1 million. Still raised a lot of money, but not 6.1 million. And when you look into the numbers, I promise you, I'm going to look when I have a chance to Kamala Harris's numbers, Beto's numbers, and the others. There's going to be a lot of bundlers and high dollar donors in that crowd. And it's just it's getting even more amazing. I don't know, for those of you that really follow politics. There's a guy named Peter Dow, and he was a Clinton lieutenant. He used to work for Hillary Clinton. He was a Clinton sycophant that was just going after Bernie like you would not believe in 2016. Going after Bernie supporters on Twitter constantly. Smears, propaganda, you name it. Well, even Peter Dow sees the writing on the wall, folks. Thread. Bernie Sanders can beat Trump. Bernie Sanders is a frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. He has millions of dedicated supporters and is raising tens of millions of dollars. This is Peter Dow saying this. Few people in politics criticized him more than I did in 2016, but I'm a realist. With right-wing extremists running our government and with Trump sycophants like Mitch McConnell Lindsey Graham, Mike Pence, William Barr, shredding our norms and values. Bernie Sanders is not the problem. In fact, he is out there spreading a progressive message. We need as many people committed to a strong progressive message as possible, especially when they inspire millions of young voters. It is very tough to set aside the frustration of 2016, but I implore Bernie and Hillary supporters to try to come together. Sanders has his problems. I've criticized him on guns, environmental justice, and immigration. I've also criticized Hillary Clinton, who I worked for, on drones, fracking, and Iraq. A lot more to criticize. We can't expect our candidates to be flawless, but everything is on the line in 2020. There are a number of inspiring Dem candidates in a large and diverse field. Each has weaknesses and strengths. I haven't backed anyone, and I don't plan to in the immediate future. But replaying 2016 fights, no matter who does it, harms our 2020 chances. Look, I told hard truths in 2016, and I'm telling them now. I follow my heart and my gut. I know people get pissed off at me, and that's their right. But the word I want to leave behind will be much better led by someone like Sanders than Trump and his white nationalist cronies. And to anyone questioning my loyalties and motives, I stuck with Hillary through thick and thin in 2016, despite being mobbed, threatened, and harassed. I grew up in a war, and I don't abandon people in the trenches. But Hillary isn't running today, and I want to win in 2020. And Winnie Wong, who works now for Bernie's campaign and has been a big Bernie supporter, says, "Welcome to the political revolution, Peter." One thing that's super important about what he said, and some of what he said is BS. I mean, he was harassed. If you know Peter Dow in 2016, he was doing the harassing. But I digress. I want to win. If this is actually about winning and beating Donald Trump, it's still early, granted. But if you want to win, it's not even a contest. Bernie Sanders has the best chance to beat Donald Trump. If you look at the states that made Donald Trump president, Bernie Sanders is popular. Bernie Sanders currently is leading the polls in Wisconsin. I don't know the Michigan or Pennsylvania polls, but a Wisconsin poll shows Bernie Sanders in the lead. He speaks to those blue-collar workers in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. He was against NAFTA. Trump won because of NAFTA. I've said it since 2016. I'll say it again. And the exit polls, if anyone cares to read them in those states, show the top issue, trade, immigration. Wait, Hillary Clinton was pro-NAFTA? Right. I mean, this is the reality, whether you like it or not. So, if they want to win, I think Peter Dow said it right. Bernie Sanders has the best chance to beat Trump. If Joe Biden wants to come in, I think Bernie Sanders will take him out, and it's not even going to be that tough. And frankly, I think there's more skeletons in Mr. Biden's closet. Tick-tock, tick-tock.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.